And the other thing that I think is kind of ridiculous is like people's concept of fair. Again, the default economically is poverty. Poverty is the default. Prestige and wealth and being able to just like live an average lifestyle, even in the US, is is what is not normal. For the longest time, if you look at historically, poverty really is what's supposed to happen. Being wealthy or being having something a little more is the benefit. Okay, so we're on, and controversial topics to not so controversial, but like a heated topic on a lot of things, tariffs and tariffs and immigration, and basically Trump's back in office. He's doing everything that he says he will,
And the
and
H-1B.
yeah, the H-1B thing, and so we're trying to get it in. And it's like, okay, so I'm still blown about the fact. So you mentioned like somewhat this week that every country has tariffs. I
Mhm.
am just so blown to think that we as a third world country would have it. Of like,
Well,
why?
it's because the Philippines also has to take care of themselves, because not every single country is a first world country. So imagine if you're like the Philippines and then you're also competing against other countries. Like what other countries border the Philippines would you say that's a third world country?
So I would say, oh, third world country. I would say like I would think Africa. I would think
Well,
uh,
Africa's kind of far away, but
yeah, but like Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand.
Mhm.
But like for me,
Yeah,
like that's kind of like reasonable.
yeah,
They
like
they
they're
have
on
it.
the same, let's say, level, right? And so every country, I just kind of have some background here. Every country has a competitive advantage, right? A
Right.
competitive advantage is like the thing that you can do best. That as if you sell that product or service, it would benefit you greatly as well as somebody else. Um, and unfortunately, like not everybody can be self-sufficient, or like not everybody can have everything done in their country at the lowest best price. And so
Right.
governments create tariffs to try to protect themselves, to make their markets more competitive. I think an example of this, let's talk about it in the United States. So the United States makes a lot of vehicles, uh, but like other countries that makes vehicles as well is Germany and Japan. So what's really interesting is, for example, when German cars come from Germany to the United States, like there's a little bit of a cost there, but not so much. But in comparison, when an American vehicle goes from the United States to Germany, for example, there's going to be a higher cost to that. So let's say it would normally be like an example, just putting out numbers out there, like $30,000. Now that $30,000 car becomes like 45,000 or 40. Like the point being that it increased substantially, and this goes with anything. But primarily, the issue with the tariffs with the United States is, in general, the United States is in a deficit in terms of tariffs. So, meaning as a whole, let's say the United States can gain $100 billion from other countries, being taxed from their products. But in total, let's say the United States is actually like having to be is taxed more in accumulation for, like, let's say 200 billion. So 200 billion minus 100. So the United States is technically losing the tariff war. And it's been like that for years, actually. It's been like that for years. But the thing is, the United States is so economically powerful that I guess it's not that big a deal, let's say.
Wait. So from what I'm getting at from you is that it seems like for tariffs with the United States, they haven't really imposed it on other products.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so
Hmm.
other countries they do that with the United States products, but like the US has just not been doing that for anyone else. Like
Yes, well,
that's what I'm getting.
the United States still does it, like, to other countries. But as a general rule, the United States is in a deficit. So, like, for lack of better words, I guess, if you want fairness, like if the United States taxes 100 billion and then they're taxed 1 billion, like 100 billion, that's fair. But what's happening is, as a whole, as a cumulative, the United States is getting taxed more than they're able to get from taxing other countries. And so that's like the issue that's been going on, because that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. But at the same time, the United States is so economically strong that it hasn't been much of a political issue until recently. So that's where a lot of the tariff wars kind of comes through. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but just a couple of weeks ago, there was that issue with Canada. So Canada and Mexico were talking to the United States and saying politically, like, okay, they're not going to stand for X, Y, and Z. And so, like, we're not going to have that. But then the United States uses that economic leverage to say, okay, so you're saying this, okay, so we're going to even out the tariffs. We're going to tax your products more. And because of that economic push, now they're having a U-turn in their economic view, like in their political view, and what was the issue.
Let me for me, one of the things that I see online constantly is that there are other people who keep complaining that tariffs don't really work. That number one, like, it does make everything more expensive. It does make everything more expensive for consumers. I don't disagree with people about that online. And this whole time, the reason that I thought Trump was putting tariffs on was because his purpose was to get people to basically lower their prices and to get people to have some sort of better agreement and to get that subject. Like, that's what I thought the tariffs were. Like, okay, they put a tariff on Canada and they put a tariff on Mexico, and then later on you'd see a post about Trump going on in Twitter, or X rather right now. He go on X and says, okay, Mexico and I are at an agreement with X, Y, and Z, and this is what we're going to do. This is what we've agreed, and so we've delayed the tariffs. And then they do the same thing with Justin Trudeau in Canada. We've come to an agreement. This is what we're going to do. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, if Trump's tariff, if what he was thinking was to push countries to put in a little more effort to sell to the United States, because if whether you admit it or not, the greatest market in the world right now, like the consumers market, is in the United States. I think they do have a lot of purchasing power, and I think that a lot of countries in the world, wherever you go to, would really try and advertise and sell on marketplace. Kind of like the thing I'm thinking about is like, okay, if Amazon is like the greatest online retailer in the world, and you want to sell your products on Amazon, then I think it would be fair for Amazon to charge a little bit more, since there is more demand for their platform. And that's how I see it with the US. And so when I see Mexico and Canada kind of agreeing to these new terms, I'm thinking, well, maybe these tariffs things are working then. Maybe the purpose of it is being accomplished. It might not necessarily be that the economic purposes, like things might get a little more expensive or like a whole lot more expensive. But in my mind, I thought that it was working. And so I'm kind of I'm kind of so with the situation. And for me, I think, okay, maybe it's a good thing that they did have it. But like, what are people saying? Like, what's your opinion on it? What's your stand on it?
Well, so purely from an economic point of view, tariffs in general are bad. So outside of, because the problem with that is it messes with the free market. What happens is, let's say a country like the Philippines, like, what is its competitive advantages? Like, if a country is trying to be self-sustaining as much as possible, or like, never mind countries, let's talk about in people. Imagine people as countries. Like, imagine that you have this fantastic athlete who is an NBA player, let's say, right? An NBA player is likely better at mowing their own lawn than the average person, right? But even though he can like mow his own lawn, his competitive advantage is probably working on his body to be able to freaking play basketball and make even more money, while somebody else can probably do that for him. And so that person, like their competitive advantage is to be able to do that for him, even though him as an individual is like better at like athletically than the other guy.
Right.
And so like it's kind of like that in other countries where one country can be self-sustaining, but it's going to cost them a lot more. Imagine in families, if you have to own your own chickens, own your own cow, to have
Right.
like the goods and services like that you need to have. So this is kind of like where it's similar, like just trades with tariffs. So as an economic thing, it's really not good because it actually you as a country incur the costs as well as that other country. Because what like the what could happen is, for example, if those cars that we're talking about, like what the other country can be doing is simply increase their prices. Like although
Right.
the country is taxing that more, the who's really going to get taxed potentially, because it could be that country's consumers is really going to be paying the tax. So that's the argument against it in general. It's not a United States thing. It's just by principle on what tariffs do. But on the other hand, in terms of a political move, I mean, you can't say that it hasn't been working, because there's been a lot more movement in terms of what the United States can or can't do now because that is being used. And Donald Trump being a businessman, and like to get to that level of a multimillionaire businessman, it takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of skill and like social ability to be able to do the things that he does. So like there's that aspect to it. But as a general rule, I don't like it.
Mm.
But at the same time, if it gets things moving on some other aspects of the country, I think it's pretty good. And especially we got to think about the role of a leader or a president of a country. I think
Right.
it's very obvious that if you are a president of a country, you should prioritize your citizens first. And I think it's just kind of recent that it's kind of taboo to say that or even think about it, because we as a people should always have like that idea of kumbaya for all, which sounds great in print. It sounds great, but in terms of actual reality, it's
Mhm.
it's a lot harder to do. I think it's always important to kind of think about how I think there's a list of prioritizations of importance. The first person that you gotta like focus on is you yourself as an individual, right? And then from there, the people that you should care about most, I think, is the family. And then
Right.
from the family, like maybe extended family, now friends, family, then friends, because it's and then like from outside of your family, like it's gonna be your community, and then like your state, then your country, and then the world. Kind of like it expands from the inside outside, and not the thinking of like there's you yourself, and now you got to go and change the world. I think going from that point of view is more difficult than we would think, as well as I just think that's not really productive.
One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is like what do you think? So what do you think would happen? So tariffs economically generally it's just very bad because they do restrict trade and they do make everything more expensive to consumers. By the way, I think it's like I think it's ironic. I find it very ironic that some of the people who were gonna vote for Kamala, who where one of her policies was we're gonna raise corporate taxes and we're gonna go after these business corporations, and in essence, that's also gonna make everything more expensive. And then you go to the Trump side, they're like, tariffs are also gonna make everything more expensive. I think people should realize, first and foremost of all, anytime you go after a business and make it harder for a business, you're always gonna make it harder for consumers. And which makes it makes you realize why a business is very is very profitable. Anytime you raise prices on them, every time you raise prices on an industry or anything in general, you're just making it hard for consumers. People
Yeah,
should definitely realize that.
I agree. It's not a math problem though. That's the thing. So like the United States is in a $1 trillion deficit. So like
Mhm.
with that example, I was saying like imagine that 100 billion to 200. So the United States is in a 100,000 billion or 1 trillion deficit.
Wow.
So they're technically getting screwed over as a country, um, but like other countries are benefiting from it, right? Like
Right.
Mexico, like actually practically all the other countries, right? So in some way or another, they're benefiting. They're getting more than they're giving out, and so having that stabilized, like it, preferably there's could be no tariffs whatsoever. But it's not a math problem; it's a political problem because although money moves, like power also talks, and so this is where like how would you from if you're a foreign country, how are you able to influence that foreign country? In this case money talks, so then you're able to influence them through that. um, and so you just imagine if we're trying to dial it down, so for the United States to have not even a trillion deficit, like if it can go to zero, that would mean that all the other countries, their prices would increase by quite a lot
Mhm.
actually. But that's only fair. Like it's a hard political problem because at the same time, as I say that, right, the United States is still pretty wealthy. Like they can afford it. While if that thing happens, like what happens to another, like a third world country, like you know Thailand or something, a lot of things would increase there as well. And it kind of goes both ways. So it's not like,
Right.
and also it's like we're talking about country to country. It's not even the countries; it's the businesses in those countries. So an issue with that is the government does not know as well as the private industry in their particular industry. Like regarding the cars, for example, um, like there's some political mandates. When Joe Biden was president, he mandated that by 2030, all car manufacturers in the United States will need to be electric. Now that
Yeah.
sounds good at the time, and it probably got a lot of applause and a lot of clout for him.
Oh yeah,
But
definitely.
now it's like, hey, like why now? That's like it's almost like the car manufacturing companies. They know better how to make cars than the government. It's almost like an apprentice or a third party like watching something, and then they recognize like Tesla's doing well. It's like, okay, so Tesla's doing well. So hey, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, like Mitsubishi, like you guys got to do the same thing that your competitors doing. See, that becomes an issue because it's like the government's meddling in the affairs of private business,
Right.
and like
I
they don't. What if they're wrong? And in this case, we're
It's
kind of
true.
seeing that it could be somewhat wrong. Like who knows how it is in the future? Like maybe, for example, the new technology is actually hydro fusion. Maybe it's actually like literal water is the way you're going to be powering your cars. It's going to be more effective. It's safer for the environment. Like
Right.
water versus like electricity. But we don't know that. The government for sure won't know that before private industry because that's not their expertise. It's like a master being told from a bunch of other people like what to do with their craft. And some of these masters, let's say like these bigger companies, they could be wrong. But that's why it's okay for them to be wrong. If they're wrong, the other masters can learn from their mistakes, right? Like that's where competition comes in. And this as well with all these other countries with how they're handling policies. At the moment, we have two fairly big masters, let's say, of countries, which is the United States and China, which they're pretty different on how they are working as a country. And all these other countries below them, let's say, third world countries, they can see what's working, what's not. And
Mhm.
like the thing about this separation of powers and just separation is that we can see what works and what doesn't, and then we can try to apply what works in our own lives. And then, like, to break it down even more, the United States is made up of different states, 50 states. And so
Yeah.
with those 50 states, each state legislation has their own policies. Not this one like big federal government isn't everything for. And so those 50 states, they try X, Y, and Z in what they think works. And I'm sure everybody's intentions are good, or as good as it can be in terms of trying to implement. But afterwards, after a couple of years, we are able to see what works, and how the federal government grows is they see among their 50 children what's working and what's not. And the general rule should be like, and what they're trying, what should be happening is that, that we take the best policies of a state and try to apply it to the whole country. Funny enough, this is how Obamacare was made. If we want to get to that topic, and it actually came from Utah.
Yeah, like where wasn't the thing about it was like we're trying so hard to have good intentions be implemented everywhere. And I like the analogy that you use where you have like a third-rate apprentice who comes in and tells you how to do the stuff that you do. Like I just like I think it's hilarious. Like someone comes in and, for example, tells me like how I need to run my house, and he like, for example, he comes in and like it's like a toddler coming in, bossing me around how I should like sweep the floors and cook my food. And I'm like, I'm gonna kick you out of here. Like I really don't
Well,
like it when
it's funny you say that. I think it's a toddler personality, but with like a bodybuilder body. So it can be dangerous. Like this is like the government, like it actually has power, and this is why it needs to exercise caution. It's like what you do will create a precedent on what can be done in the future. In this case, funny enough, like Donald Trump is doing a lot of executive orders. Actually, for me personally, I actually don't like that. I think as a general rule, because this is the idea that like a king in a way is kind of making all these laws. It's legal.
Right.
First of all, I gotta clarify that it's legal. But the person that set this precedent was actually Joe Biden. Like he made all these executive orders, and now that power of all these executive orders is being done after him. So now it just becomes this thing where like, I wish we didn't have to have all these executive orders, but rather have people kind of come up with it themselves. However, that is a long process. And in this case, I think Donald Trump made a lot of promises. And so he's trying to, what is it? I think his slogan is promises made, promises kept. And so he's trying to like fulfill those. And I mean, there's so much stuff that he's doing is kind of, it's a blur sometimes on all these different executive orders, from defending the border to ICE, like so many things happening.
Mhm.
And we'll see how it is. And I think like it's only been like a month. So we'll see how the remaining years go. But like, I think the American people in general, number one, just want everything to be better economically speaking. And with that said, there's also that issue about the H-1B. Maybe let's talk about H-1B first before maybe a broader sense. But Chris, what do you know about the H-1B?
So like from what I know is that this is basically wasn't this like a work visa qualification? Like you apply to a company in the United States, and if they say yeah, then that company will basically process that for you and basically vouches for you and says, yeah, we want this person from China or from Taiwan or from Japan or Hong Kong. We want this person to come to the United States and work. That's my understanding of, very oversimplification of an H-1B visa. And with Trump's, with Trump's policy on immigrants, I know that that's kind of being slowed down. But I actually thought his target was illegal immigrants. What was this? What's this
Yeah.
controversy on H-1B visas?
So H-1B, excuse me, the H-1B visa is a separate issue from the illegal immigration
Okay.
issue. So it's more. So the H-1B allows people of high skills to immigrate to the United States and work there. And so, like the joke about it, let's say, is that in the tech field, there's a lot of Indians from India getting that H-1B, and the negative, like I guess the naysayers would say that it's almost in a way like modern day slavery because, well, H-1B is like it's almost like a person of high skills coming to the United States, but they're not going to get paid what they're worth, let's say. So let's say an IT position probably pays around like 150K, or upwards.
Mhm.
But let's say getting somebody of that skill level from another country, they come to the United States, but they're only going to get paid, let's say 60,000. Like, would you say that's fair?
Coming from me, okay. Let me tell people what Filipinos are thinking. So over the years, there are still more Filipinos, and there still are Filipinos who want to go to the United States. What would that mean? That would mean that despite getting a lower salary, they still get better benefits. They still have the benefit of living in a certain state, and it's much better than living in the Philippines. My I think for me it's fair, and for a lot of people, because they still want to go to the US, then that must mean that it's still beneficial for them. Like statistically, if we're following the numbers, if there are more people coming in, shouldn't that mean that it's still kind of fair?
Yeah, I mean, the United States is the number one country in terms of immigration, right? And so,
Right.
with that said, although it might seem unfair to some, people will not do it unless they consider it fair, if not a better deal than what they could already have. And like, let's just get that out of the way. So, yeah, like from 150, or let's say even 200K compared to some like 60K, that's $140,000.
Right.
And it sounds unfair to us, like to some people. I think it's because of privilege in general. Because I like when we talked about this before. You mentioned, Chris, that in economics, the average, like the normal thing for most people is poverty. Like posterity, like being prosperous is
It's
new.
not
It's
normal.
actually, yeah, it's not normal. It's very privileged. And in this case, like I think we also saw this video where if you make more than like 30K a year, $30,000 a year, you're the top 1% of the world,
Right.
right? And in here, like that's like poverty level in the
I mean,
United
there's
States.
something wrong. There's something
Like
wrong with that
that,
statistic, like I mentioned last time. But I'll get into that. I'll get into that later. Yeah, go ahead
like
first.
it's not that it's not that it's like there's just certain things outside of like in the United States that makes it a richer country. This could be from more opportunities. This could be just like maybe the buildings. This could be just the land. There's just more stuff here, and there's a reason for it. There's a reason why so many people are trying to immigrate to the United States, like by the millions. The wait time, the line is so long, and I think some
Mhm.
detractors about like the H-1B is that how it hurts the average American worker. Let's say like the IT or computer science graduate. Like it's harder for them to get the job, which I completely agree. I completely agree with that. However, the company, like imagine if you have your own company, would you hire an American that just came out of college, or if you can, you can hire this super genius from India, let's say, and pay them
Right.
about the same rate. Now, like this might sound unfair, but but it's what's happening is the person from India would think that that's a better deal, and so like if they agree to it, like which of these two would you choose? Well, this is where the companies have to make that decision. Like I don't know the exact nuances of it, but there are pros and cons for both decisions. I mean, one is maybe you're gonna have this, you're gonna have a kid who's more than willing to like learn everything, let's say, but then on the other hand, you have one that's more experienced, but maybe has a difficulty in terms of the language. So this is where the companies make their own decision. But you can better understand that this
Right.
isn't just a like a immigration issue. Like the companies needs to make that, and I think it's both ways will benefit the United States. Like
Right.
there's not a limited job position as well. I think that there's a lot of things that can be made there, and
Wait. Right now, let
something.
me ask you, like, is there a regulation that tells people that the minimum wage for H-1B visas is X amount of money? Like, is there a rule about how much you should pay H-1Bs right now,
Yeah,
or is there? It's not there. There is.
yeah. So I believe the minimum should be at least 60,000. So this is to make sure
Okay.
that there actually is no modern day slavery, in that a company hires somebody, and it's gonna be like it's dirt poor, like maybe like $10, and then like they're kind of holding their ability to stay in the US like over their heads. So that does
Okay.
happen. Like for sure, people can be people. So there's things that are nasty that would happen, and for those things, for sure, let's go get them. But in terms of the H-1B as a whole, um, the minimum is like $60,000 at least, and I think like they need to have they need to have actual qualifications. So
Mhm.
you can't just hire a super genius without without like a university degree. And this is like the verification process for the United States, so that like for the United States government to audit those companies. So that is why in a lot of these countries it's actually so competitive, like academically speaking. If they want to get to the United States, they need to be like the top 1%, academically speaking.
Right.
So this is why it's like the things on paper sometimes doesn't reflect quite in the real world, but that's how we can measure something. At least something can be measured. And
Can
that's
I?
why
I
it's so
want to
hard.
share. Like, I
Mhm.
want to share my experience. Like, you probably know this. I told you that there was a point in time where I was graduating and I was trying to look for a job, and I was trying to look for a job in the United States. And I think a lot of people don't realize. So let people know what it's like for someone from the Philippines who was already in Hawaii. He was about to graduate. I was about to graduate at the time, and I'm looking for a job. It's so much harder to find a job when companies have to think of the cost of getting a visa for their workers, and the process is so much harder. And then to top it off, you got to pay them the same as everyone else. Because for me, like, I think I we got to give people credit to who are coming from other countries. If people are coming from third world countries, they tend to be more resilient. What I was going to do, I would be fine. I would live fine on a $60,000 a year salary. That's the minimum, right? That's the minimum,
Yeah, that's the
60,000.
minimum.
Okay. And it's just to make sure that you basically are alive and have enough of your expenses.
Well, no, no,
I
no, no. It's to, I want to clarify. It's
Yeah.
to make sure, for example, like if that's the case, right? What stops a company from just hiring the absolute, like, hiring as many people as possible and just paying them the absolute minimum? Like, what is stopping them from doing that? These little, like these standards, like at least 60K, they need to at least have some sort of certification, like a bachelor's or something. Like these little these standards make sure that a company doesn't just start importing a lot of people and then just making them do whatever.
Okay,
It's
but
to
like
make
what's
sure
the
that there's,
minimum? Like, what's the
yeah.
minimum
So
experience?
60K is the
Okay.
minimum by salary. But like outside of that, like I'm just saying, what's the opposite of that? What if there is not a salary cap?
Right. Okay.
But like
Well,
obviously, so what's happening here is like companies are trying to look for anything above, anything that they can hire somebody that really they're worth more than 60K. That's the difference
right.
that the company should be making, in addition to the other stuff, like in like normal, like anytime you want to hire somebody, you better hope they give you more revenue than they are, like than their expenses.
Yeah, like my issue, like, it's not really so much the amount. The thing that I was trying to point out is that no matter what the salary was, I'm gonna find a way to make it work. I was prepared when I was looking for a job. I was prepared to not own a car, to just basically take public transportation every day back and forth from work. I'm prepared to live in a small apartment room and then split that apartment room with someone else, and I could sleep on the floor and they could like have a regular bed. I am prepared to never eat out, and I am prepared to I'm prepared to go through extreme measures to survive, because the thing about it is so much better than going back to a country where they underappreciate, like, the issue with trying to get a degree in the United States for Filipinos, and from BYU Hawaii, is that some of these graduates, they come home and the worry about them is that they are overqualified. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, we're worried about these people being overqualified, and then we're also worried about people getting underqualified, and then you're also looking for someone with experience. It's so much harder to find that. At the same time, you kind of need to survive, and the minimum wage, like, if you compare it in spending value, the minimum wage in the Philippines to in terms of spending power is so much more lower than the minimum wage in the US in terms of spending power, and that also doesn't come with very good benefits. And you also have a government who is, not very transparent in the way that they do things. Like, there's a lot of government
Mhm.
agencies right now that are taking away, that are kind of damaging, I think is the better term, damaging the benefits that government subsidized benefits that were supposed to be initially for the benefit of the people. Like, that's my thing.
Mhm.
Like, if I don't need, I just need everything to be like living standards, like I can at least survive. And the other thing that I think is kind of ridiculous is like people's concept of fair. Again, the default economically is poverty. Poverty is the default. Prestige and wealth and being able to just like live an average lifestyle, even in the US, is what is not normal. For the longest time, if you look at historically, poverty really is what's supposed to happen. Being wealthy or being having something a little more is the benefit. And the, going back to this concept of fair, like, people people's idea of fairness change, like when they see a company make $100,000 because of $1,000 worker, they're thinking, oh wait, if a company gets $100,000, then this person A should get 50,000, and then the company should get 50,000, because that's what's fair, that's what's 50-50. No, stop thinking that fair should be 50-50. There is no such thing as fair 50-50. The only thing that you should think about is, do both of you benefit? Do both of you win?
Well,
Do both of you get something from it? Like, I don't think I think it's ridiculous. Robin, what was his name? The comedian Robin Williams, was
wait,
it?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
he played Genie in Aladdin, and like he accepted a contract and said, okay, I want to play Genie, and the reason I want to do it is because I'm going to build a legacy for children. They're going to look back at this and they're going to enjoy. When he found out that Aladdin was a box office hit and earned so much money, he started complaining, like, this is not fair. I was only offered this much. I'm like, this is what you agreed on. This was to you at the time, before you knew the amount, was something that you were
well,
going to be happy with.
yeah.
And and so that for me is like, you have to change your definition of fair. Fair for me is like, if both of you benefits, good. If
Mm,
the company doesn't offer you good benefits, or it doesn't comp you very well, there's always the option to go look for another place to work, right?
yes, but I like how you're trying to define fairness, and I think a lot of people would agree with you. But now this isn't a fairness problem. This is a psychological problem. I remember learning about this where if you were to have like, man, I can't remember the exact parameters of this, but I think some behavioral scientists were asking around on how this is like the general term on it, and so they started asking people, would they rather make like whatever their salary, like let's say, would you rather make $80,000 but and the people around you make around like 65, or would you rather make like 100K and the people around you makes 120? Guess what most people would say.
Well, like I remember this. Most people would pick the 85 and everyone around them is like 60K. Is that right?
No, most
Wait,
people
what?
would rather. Actually, no, yeah, you're right. Yeah, sorry, I got it mixed up.
Okay.
Yeah. So most people would rather make 80K and everybody around them makes 65. And it's kind of interesting because this is like the psychology part of it, which is people compare themselves to their peers, and this is why this is like in the United States we say it's keeping up with the Joneses.
Right.
This is where lifestyle inflation could happen. This is how doctors, people making over 100K, 200, 300K can still be living paycheck to paycheck. How can they be doing that? Well, because as your income increases, your expectation from life increases. And sometimes they always just keep meeting in the middle, or your expectations is higher than your income. And so you're still going to be in debt. Now,
do you want to know what I would answer to that question? Like what my response was when I was asked that?
you'd rather make 100K while everybody around you makes 65.
No.
You want to get the best of both worlds.
Like creating a third option. Like, no, I'm gonna make my own path. Like, I'm gonna make 100K. I'm gonna make sure everyone works at 60K. Yeah, I'm gonna be the boss. You're like, no, okay.
It's not enough for you to succeed. Others must fail.
Yeah, everyone's gotta be like below me. Gosh, that is a terrible concept to have. Like, shoot me when I decide the day that I say, like, okay, I'm that is such an evil concept. That is such an evil mindset to have. Like, my response to that when I was asked that by my professor, I responded with, I'd rather have the 80K while everyone else in a country where everyone else is working 60K. And the reason that I gave that answer is because like there's a psychological background to it. The reason I gave that answer is that the market, businesses, everything is gonna tailor it to the level of the 60K. Like if you think about it, like okay, I'm gonna like businesses are gonna think, okay, most people can't afford it, so I'm gonna lower my prices or I'm gonna find a way to make it cheaper and more affordable. Meanwhile, like I think it's beneficial if you have the greater advantage, and if you look at it from like an evolutionary psychology evolution standpoint, it's that people have basically people basically look at the normal. They sell to the normal and they cater to the normal. And if you have a way to be above the normal, then your tendencies you're gonna be you're gonna live a better lifestyle. I don't agree that we should set rules to make sure that everyone is paid the same. I just like if you're given the option to move to a place where you potentially earn more, then why not do that? Like for example, for a lot of people who are living in the United States, they migrate to the Philippines because the cost of living is so much cheaper, and they were able to earn and save a lot more. Like that's my
funny.
opinion on.
Yeah, no, I think like you mentioned, there is that you got to figure out first when with that question, right? There is that idea of like if everybody's making a lot more than you, is everything going to stay the same? I think the assumption is yes, but with that other thinking of, well, if everybody around you is making more, that means that everything's going to cost more. I think this is I would consider similar to the Californian problem, which is people in California are making more on average, but everything costs more on average.
Right.
So it kind of balances out, let's say. But this is why it becomes, I feel like in the United States, we have something called, like we have the minimum wage. And the federal minimum wage is $7.25, but then every state chooses their minimum wage from that starting point, from that salary floor.
Right.
And the issue that happens is California's, man, I don't know my exact numbers, but the idea is California's minimum wage, let's say, is like 17.50, while another states can be 15. Hawaii, I think, is 15.
Yeah,
And
it was
here in
15.
Utah,
Now it was 14 last I checked. Wow.
yeah, something like that. And in Utah, it's like 7.50. But it really depends. So if your salary floor is really high, I think there's just this idea like the minimum wage is actually not helping anybody at all. Because if you increase the minimum wage, like why are we stopping at $15 or 20? Why or like even 30? Like why not have the minimum wage to $100? Well, it's
Mhm.
because basic economics is you increase like that. Like if you make it to $100, let's say, there's going to be a lot of jobs that won't exist, and there's a lot of services that won't exist because there's a lot of things that products and services that are not worth $100 like per hour. And so you're just screwing with the people's freedoms, really. And what's going to happen is if that happens, like it's a domino effect with the other states. I mentioned, like, I mean, Utah is neighboring California, and so like it's pretty close to California, and so like there's that disparity there, but it's hard to, I guess, have that arbitrage because you're also being taxed more in California. Everything costs
Right.
more, but I think the best answer, like in terms of the minimum wage, although the intentions are there to have people like have a living wage, uh, we got to understand like it's not really the government even doing that. It's the businesses which then employs people, the businesses which are employed by people. I think we just gotta like the more freedoms we're gonna have, like with less tariffs, really like that no minimum wage. Hopefully, like it won't happen, but with those things,
All right.
people are gonna have more freedoms to actually see what they're worth. Like you're only worth how much somebody is willing to kind of pay for you. And this is why it's important to have like all these skills and knowledge. And if you feel slighted with that, like prove that organization wrong. If you're like a McDonald's employee,
Right.
McDonald's was my first job, um, and like you don't feel like you are being paid, and at the time like minimum wage was like $7 or something. You don't feel like you're actually like you feel like you're worth more than seven. Good for you, and go do like things that makes you worth more than seven. You can make your own company, like, but understand the risk to that. It's not like the government, the businesses and corporations are really out to get you specifically.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, regarding with the immigration thing with the H-1B, going back to it, I think it's going to be a good thing for the United States as a whole if we keep it. I'm not in favor of taking that down because the separate issue of that is this idea of illegal immigration. Is there an issue with that in the Philippines, Chris? Is there an influx of people trying to get to the Philippines
You
to
can't
work
have
and
an illegal
live?
immigration problem if you don't have any immigration laws.
Okay.
Like that's the only thing about it. Like if we don't have that problem because I think we're very lax in terms of like bringing people in because we are reliant on other people.
Really?
Now,
Like what?
how
For what?
I'm pretty sure that we have rules to like restrict criminals.
Hmm.
That's it. But I'm not sure how well that's enforced.
Yeah.
Is the other issue. So because you don't really hear people talking about Philippines having an immigration issue. In fact, like we're trying to have the more people coming in here. We like having more big spenders here.
Mm.
Actually, I'm a little again. Well, I'm a little concerned about that. Like having big spenders always come to the Philippines because, like, if eventually you have more big spenders than you do with like local people who barely have enough to survive, then eventually you're gonna have the same problem as Hawaii, where you
Oh
had
yeah.
people kept coming
I
in,
was saying
and
that problem reminds me of Hawaii.
yeah, it's like that's what the problems they had. They eventually had to kick people out of their own state. They had to move out of their own state. And I'm thinking like, is that gonna be a problem in the Philippines? Most likely not, because the people who do come here to the Philippines, like they rely on like pensions and their retirement from their own countries, and they don't pay taxes to the Philippine government, aside from like sales tax and like when you do
Yeah,
purchase stuff. So I think
that's really
the Philippine
interesting.
government will still prioritize Filipinos so that they could have the government can still have a income tax, um, income from those Filipinos.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about it where like Hawaii has that problem that there's so many tourists that it kind of drives up the market.
Right.
But at the same like it's just the free market as well. Like this is gonna sound maybe kind of elitist, but like Hawaii is such a desirable place. This is where I don't know if what kind of state regulation needs to happen to kind of make it as fair as possible for other people. I mean, because Canada has the opposite problem of what you were mentioning. They have too many foreigners invested in Canadian like real estate and things like that.
Right.
Like Chinatown is very much Chinatown in Canada, and there's so many different pockets like that that the average Canadian can't really compete with that.
Mhm.
Like you, but at the same time, if you let, here's the issue: if you let the free market, like I've been kind of advocating for, do its course, the moment you do that, the moment you open those gates, the people that have money would have a lot more influence than people that doesn't, and
Right.
that's very obvious. Now, it doesn't. Now the thing about it, it's not going to be at that point. It's not going to be a racial issue or whatever. It's going to be a class problem. Because the thing with the free market that is a problem sometimes is that the people that don't have much, they're not that they're penalized. They just don't have as many opportunities.
Right.
But in the long run, it's a lot better for everybody. In the short run, there's a lot of pain and frustrations that one can feel from that particular group of people that have the haves compared to
Mhm.
you not having anything. But
Like when you mentioned like the short run, I think for short run, the short run for some people is sometimes like an entire life or like the remaining lifetime of say like a senior citizen or like someone who's like a 40-year-old. Like that's the span of a short time, and they don't necessarily reap the benefits. I think that's one of the problems of
exactly.
like trying to solve problems in the short run.
Well, because of all these, there's all these problems that accumulate, and now one particular generation is gonna have to eat that crap, like so everybody else can kind of survive. Now, I think
Right.
one issue that the United States is going to be addressing in the future, or maybe more recent, is going to be Social Security. Um, I mean, the math simply isn't mathing in terms of Social Security. But then, how are we going to rectify that? How should the government, who's been taking money, try to balance out their books when the people that they owe money to, they owe money to a lot of people,
Right.
primarily their own citizens. But with that said, how can they pay them? I mean, the reason being is because the lifetime expectancy of the individual has increased. Before, you could get Social Security at the age of 59 and a half, really 65 fully, 65 and over. But then if you live longer at like 80, 90, then you're draining the system for like 25 plus years potentially. And then
Mhm.
the taxes that you paid as you do that, it doesn't really cover for yourself. This is why I think a lot of financial advisors in the United States are saying you got to prepare, you got to save and invest to protect yourself before, and not consider Social Security.
Yeah, it's
I
not
mean,
like
like I'm not
It's
sure
the
how the
worst place to
Philippines is going to
invest.
handle it,
Oh
This
gosh.
is a very real issue that some generation is gonna eat, and obviously it's very unpopular. And so, because it's so unpopular, everybody's trying to kick the can down the road because it's gonna make you be a villain in probably history's eyes when it's all said and done. But we'll see how it goes.
There was I'm trying to remember the president who there was a president who like had a pet raccoon. What was that? What was that
Pet
president
raccoon.
who I'm looking it up right now. Like who was that? Coolidge. President Coolidge. Okay. President Coolidge during his time, right? Like he was there was like an economic problem in the US. And he basically I think he was labeled as someone who like didn't do anything because I think he knew that if the government got involved, then it would mess up the markets and it would hurt people in the long run. It would hurt the American people in the long run. And I think Ronald Reagan, President Reagan, also said that the worst thing you can do is have a government come and help you because it's not just an issue of money; it's also an issue of power. When you let government try and fix your problems, you're basically trying to give up a little bit of the people's freedom and you're giving them more power, and it's led to the problem where if the government becomes too powerful, then it's really hard to stop them. I think that's the problem that the United States is facing right now.
Well,
Is that the government's power is much larger than it was
mhm.
like 50 years ago.
Yeah, and I think going back to the expertise of the government does not like they're not the masters at like economics because that's really not their place. That's really not
No,
their
yeah,
thing. Like I believe as a generality that the government works to protect the life, liberty, and property.
hmm
And anything outside of that, it becomes muddled with their primary objective. It becomes muddled with what the private industry does. And that doesn't bad things happen on both sides. Bad things happen to in the private industry and in the public and the government side. But as a whole, I think that by principalities, the government needs to work on what they're good at, and then the private industry should take care of the rest. And I think we see a lot of injustices that happen to individuals, which are injustices that we try to relate to a whole system, which becomes a bigger issue because rather than fixing the organization, like we're just tearing it down
hmm
because of that individual problem. I mean, everybody in general is trying their best to get by. Not a lot of people are trying to screw one another um, as a rule of thumb. And so I think in the United States, anyways, by the time you are ready to retire, I think you've had so many opportunities to get there that there's not a lot of excuses. Now that kind of makes me think about Gen Z and potential like Generation Alpha and how they're going to be doing it in the United States, because no matter what, the United States has just more opportunities that than other countries that like I get we're all, like it's important to have to critique the system. It's important to have these criticisms, but
hmm
then don't use that as don't use that as an excuse to complain about why your life is the way it is. As a general rule, if you're able-bodied with sound mind, you should be able to do what you want to in the United States, anyways. And I think there's this problem where people are looking for excuses and a victim. There's that victimhood mentality you were mentioning about if you were to be in the United States, you are willing to buckle down and really overcome all these difficulties just through like grit, right?
right.
And persistence. And I think people it's hard for people to kind of recognize that sometimes working like 50, 60, 70, 80 hours was kind of the norm in some cases, in some time periods. Like We're having all
Even in
these,
some Asian countries today, it's still the
yeah,
default.
like we're having a, I think, man, this can be a little bit controversial, but I just feel like in the United States, there's so many, we have created fake problems because of the privilege that people have in general. And it kind of brings me back into how the in the United States, obesity is kind of common. But back then, to be obese is a sign of wealth. And I think it's still
Right.
kind of true. Like just because we don't see it in the United States, but in comparison to the world, that's a privilege to be in. It really is. We have all this food around us that's cheap enough that you're able to eat to that level, let's say.
Right.
Um, I know it saddens me that we don't have that level of gratitude in the United States, when compared to everything else that we in other countries. There's real problems that needs addressing.
The one of the things that I keep thinking about when you mention those problems is like for me, I've stopped looking at what was well, I still look at the problems with government and I still look at the problems of society. However, as an individual, it cannot be my main focus. I made a tweet, or what's a tweet called on X right now? It's a tweet, like
Well, I actually don't know, but you know what's funny? Yeah, I want to hear about this, but it's funny because I
yeah.
don't really use Twitter, but rather I use Threads because, like, I mean, they were just they were pushing it so hard in Instagram, so I might as well have one of those accounts. But yeah, you were mentioning about like what did you tweet about?
Yeah, so the thing that I said on X is that people should rely less on government, and if possible to just eliminate and stop expecting anything from the government. I don't expect any payments from the government. And with my situation, I can actually qualify as like I can actually qualify as like a PWD individual in terms of mental health because I had a history of seeing a psychologist in the United States, and it was even a problem like even when I served my mission. Like that was a health problem that I encountered. So I could, but I don't want to depend on it, and I don't like if there's like a government program that said like the government they give free polio vaccines, free flu
Hmm.
vaccines, they give like, oh, if you have X amount of children you can get this much. I never rely on it.
Wait,
Whenever
no,
there's like
I actually would disagree with you, Chris. Like,
no,
I
no,
would
yeah.
disagree because here's the thing. I agree with you in principle on those things. But if somebody's out there trying to give me $1,000, I take it. Like
No, no.
by principle, it's like, hey, if you give everybody $1,000, like it's gonna be a bigger problem down the road. But I take it, and like if it's there, if it exists, people should be more aware of what government programs exist so they can take advantage of it, but at the same time recognize that as a whole the government's purpose is this and that, so that we just got to be careful on what this and that is, and it doesn't make it bigger, but also
No,
recognize that
no.
in the United States anyways, there's like the federal government and there's the state government. If it's the state government, I'm actually more fine with whatever
I'm
they do.
Yeah, I'm not against that. Like my issue against it is not that you shouldn't use it. Hey, if I was living in the States and like I never said no to a tax refund. I never rejected a tax refund. I never said no if someone's gonna give me free money. I'm not saying that you shouldn't accept it. My main problem is if you depend on it.
uh
That's my issue with it. Like if you depend on it, you should work as if there was no government coming in to help you. Because if you depend on it, then you can't really improve and become better. I'm gonna live. I will gladly accept what the government's going to give me, but I'm not going to go out of my way and depend on it and rely on it. And there's also like the cost of like time and effort just to get it, like getting paperwork done in the Philippines, which it's kind of amazing to me. Like, do you know how hard it is to get married in the Philippines versus getting married in the States? So when I got married in the US and I was getting married in Utah County, all I had to do was go online and apply for a marriage license and make sure that the guy like sealing me and my wife was authorized or had the authority in that country to do so. That was the only requirement. In the Philippines, you have to go to a certain place. Like if you're under a certain age, you have to like take a seminar. You have to go fall in line in certain places. You have to be in the same state. Like you and your fiance need to be in the same state or same place so that you can go to this government agency together and do X, Y, and Z. Is such a pain to get paperwork done in the Philippines and to like just fill the necessary requirements just to say that I qualify, that I wouldn't rely on government programs. I'm not
Yeah.
saying I'm not saying people who are planning to get married to just skip the marriage process all along, although I think that there are a lot of people who skip the marriage process just because of that. And it's also like hard to get a divorce like here or like an annulment here. There's it's so expensive and it's so tedious. But anyway, back to my main issues. Like, stop depending on the government. Work as if you're not going to get your government benefits. I do have a government subsidized benefit, but I also have other things like insurance and retirement plans that are going to help me because that's what I'm going to depend on the most. I want people to focus on what they can do because there's so much more that they can do than the government could for them. And I want them to focus on how they could get themselves out of the hole that people are constantly digging for us. And it reminds me of a scripture. So there's a scripture I'm reminded of. I don't know where it's from. It's basically the scripture is like, if you keep the commandments of the Lord, ye shall prosper in the land. And for me, that is very, very true because the gospel of Jesus Christ, as what is taught in our religion or in any religion, is to be proactive and to be self sufficient and to be self reliant and to not rely on other people for help. Not that you shouldn't get help, but that you shouldn't be reliant on it, and that you should be able to stand on your own 2 feet. And the most successful people that I know, the people who have the least problems are the people who got up and chose to do something about it. They didn't just wait for someone else to come and help them. They were able to get themselves out of the hole that maybe their parents or other people have dug for them, and they've become some of the most successful people that I know as well. So just don't depend on the government. You should get you like if it's needed for you, get help, but as much as possible, like stop relying on them. Stop expecting that these benefits that you get that are government subsidized will help you because they're not going to be as helpful because every country definitely there's not a country in the world that isn't broke or isn't in a deficit.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that. So practically, as an individual, focusing on things that you can't control is just wasted energy, wasted
Right.
mental energy as well. And so try to do the things that you can do. If you can't do anything about it, you can't worry about like don't worry about it because there's nothing like I think to me an example of this in general is like if you're in a plane and you're already sitting down, the moment you sat down and the plane has taken off, if you're gonna get to your destination is off your hands. And like that's a small example, but there's like bigger examples out there um, where sometimes we overthink it. Like maybe the the magnitude of Earth. Sometimes I think about where obviously don't litter things like that, but like I don't think it's gonna consume my life per se. Um, just regarding on everything else that's happening in the world. There's just so much things happening that we gotta I have to focus on my life, focusing on getting my house in order and then moving forward from there, because even doing that is already taking up like 110% of my energy. Like everything else is kind of extra, and this is where you can only do so much, but obviously if you are capable of more, try to help out other people.
This is why like I like optimistic people more. Like with that analogy that you gave, like with the plane. Okay, let me ask you this. Say you're on a plane, let's do it. Say you're on a plane crash or you're not your plane is your plane hasn't
Uh,
crashed yet. Your plane is crashing. It's
yeah.
falling down. Okay. And you're in the plane. What do you do?
Well, for me personally, if it's am I the only one in the plane? Like, am
Like
I
everyone else, like it's like a
like
regular plane. There's like
okay,
100 passengers.
but
Okay, what do you do?
I'm just there. Okay. Well, I would honestly just do a prayer. I think at that point I'm gonna say a prayer because that's what I can control. Um, like try to brace myself and do a prayer because that's the only thing you can do. Actually, this brings up an idea that I remember where if you're like in a room that you're not familiar with, or like if you're in a trap building, the thing that you can do is you can control your breathing. Like if you're in snow and you're trapped, the one thing that you can do first and foremost is just to control your breathing. Control maybe blinking. Having that sense of control in those moments of panic is going to help you like recognize on where you are, calms you down, helps you recognize that you have control in this uncontrollable situation. In the plane situation, do a prayer, um, like have the full idea of like meeting my maker.
I do a little more than that actually. Than just say a prayer. Like there's so much to be done. Like what I would do is here's what I would do. Say the plane is crashing, like you're headed to a certain death. I'd say a prayer, control my breathing, look at my surroundings, and like if like basically the crew has taken off with all the life jackets and all the parachutes and stuff,
Nah, they're not
then
gonna do that.
like if like no if that was gonna happen in the extreme situation, I would start looking at where I was headed. If I'm landed towards water or land, if I was landing to I was headed towards land, I'd start looking for places with trees, and like at the very moment when I'm closest to the ground, I'd start jumping out of the plane and try
No,
to
no,
land
no,
on
no,
those
no,
trees.
no, no, no! Don't do that! Don't do that! Like,
I like
because
no.
don't do that!
And
Don't do that! But in actuality, right? Part of the control that I have when doing that is like knowing that the pilots don't want to die either. The pilots who are probably more qualified than anybody in that plane, like if somebody's going to be piloting it, it's them, and they're already in the reins. And I can only pray and hope that they're going to be doing all they can for themselves to survive as well. Like, and you just get a brace in those situations. Like those things do exist, and I think we actually put ourselves in a lot of those situations as well. Like I think about a roller coaster. If when once you're in that roller coaster, it's like, and it's going really fast. If something happens, something happens. Those are things that you think about sometimes. Like you think about in a moment of clarity, but when it happens, you know, you who knows how you're really gonna react. But at the same time, when you already kind of talk to yourself in that situation, it helps a lot.
right. My
Um,
main point for like saying that is like basically to just not sit there. I think
fight till the
the
end. Fight
yeah,
till
fight like you
the
gotta fight to the end. I think
end.
there's no here's the thing though. I see a lot of pessimistic people, and I used to be one of these pessimistic people, where the thing that killed them wasn't the action itself or the event. The thing that killed them was that they basically gave up before they even tried. This is why it's like so important to just try, even though it's stupid and you feel like it's not gonna work logically,
Mhm.
do it anyway. And this is why businessmen keep telling people, like, if you're an entrepreneur, the thing that they recommend all the time is to at least give it a shot and try, because you never know if it's gonna work or not. The thing that
I
kills
think it
people's dreams
depends.
is like, yeah, like, oh
I
well,
think
yeah,
it depends.
you gotta be logical. You gotta be logical about it. But like
Well, actually, what's
people
funny about that?
die.
I say it depends, but
Right.
sometimes you not being logical is actually gonna help you succeed more. I remember
Really?
watching this thing, and it gave me such it impacted me so much. It's like, wow, I think like it's the idea of there's this, I think a billionaire, maybe some CEO. He was
Yeah.
asked how, like what helped him get through like making that company and making it successful. And then his answer was just ignorance. Pure ignorance is what helped me. He's like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, you see, like all the preparation and timing and everything cannot prepare you more than being completely oblivious of all these problems that's going to happen. Like and he was saying how he was just more, he's a young person ready to tackle the world. And he just did not have that capacity to think about all these problems. And because if knowing what he knew now and knowing where he's going to be, would he still make that business? And he said no. He's grateful for his younger self with that ambition and the like all the fears that he has, like all that preparation pales in comparison to just simply not knowing, for simply being ignorant for the fact. So it's like that helped him a lot. And so there's that balancing act. And I think I can appreciate a lot of dreamers that like maybe like certain musicians, like, you know, the everyday musician, it kind of helps put things into perspective for me where, okay, I might be too logical, but like I can appreciate that passion and that willingness at the same time, not quite recognizing all these hurdles ahead. But I can really appreciate that and just admire it, because I don't think that's my personality. I want to plan things out more, but I can see the benefits of somebody being like that, like in an organization, like like optimism, like was good, but even better was just straight up sometimes ignorance of the problems ahead.
I think it's better like anything, even being stupid and being like the dumbest idiot in a company is better than someone who's just not gonna do anything in a company, in my opinion. I think the worst thing that people could do is nothing. And even worse than that is like having the mindset that justifies doing nothing. Because people never realize there's so much more that they could do, but they'd rather focus on the things that they can't control. And I don't think it's necessarily like a they problem. I think that the media and like everything around us, like what was portrayed in screens right now, has a lot of manipulation into making people think that there's a lot that they can't do and to focus on the things that they control. But like I think that's really the main message and the thing that we try to bring in this podcast is like there's always gonna be something that you can do about it. Like even in when I teach my classes, so like I'm a Sunday school teacher and I even teach institute like on Wednesdays, like nine. I tell
Crazy.
people that
Crazy.
I tell people all the time there's always something that you can do about it, and that you have so much more power than you think that you have.
Well,
And
yeah, I, I think I want to
yeah,
add on to that, which is like, what's the alternative?
to
The
not doing
alternative,
anything.
the alternative, as you were saying, like having the ability to change, ability to do something about something. The alternative to that is you can't. And I think that mindset is it's
It's so
murder.
depressing.
Because it kind of makes me think about the people that I know sometimes that, and this was like I don't really like, this was maybe years ago where I had some of my friends maybe complaining about this or that, or like let's say even in classes something mundane like math is too hard for me, like I'm just gonna fail. It's like, well, like the alternative to that is like you can do it, you are smart enough, you just need to put effort, we need to have like the right resources for you. But the alternative of that would be you're right, you can't do it. Now like having that mindset is just murder, is just depressing. It's not a growth mindset. Is actually gonna like just destroy everything else that you could potentially be believing in yourself. It kind of reminds me of like, especially here in the United States, especially in our time. I think now is the best time to learn anything and everything that you want to learn about. I understand that some people have school, some people have work, but like if you really wanted to learn or do anything, you can do it at this time and in place. There's so many skills that you can learn online for free. There's so many like networking stuff that you can do for free. Just do it, like you mentioned, and I think that goes a long way to actually helping so many different people, and especially if you have responsibility to your family, or like if you're a father, mother, you have more of a responsibility to improve who you are. Because I mean, just getting comfortable is, I don't know, especially in this time and age when there's so much things happening with AI, technology. If you're gonna do something, at least try to be the best that you can be at it. I mean, that's the a goal that's worthwhile.
Right. I think for me, like I can't agree more. It's just I'm reminded of a poem that was told by me. It's like
Oh,
uh,
a poem told by you. Okay.
told to me. Sorry, told to me. Like
An original
like
poem by Chris.
like going online. Like by the way, I wrote this poem. Like I did this. I tell this to myself every day. It was told to me by a couple of people, and like I have high respect on these individuals. There's two people who told it to me, and this is how it goes. Like for every problem under the sun, there is a solution, or there is none. If there is a solution, go hurry and find it. If there is none, then don't mind it. I think
Mm,
that's the best thing. Is focus on what you can control and focus what you can do. There's so
that
much, and
sounds
there's so much.
nice.
Yeah. I remember it all the time, and I had it memorized. Again, to
Wow.
clarify, that was not by me. That was by some other random dude. It was told to me. Like it was not told by me. Like it's this weird thing with me. Like I think of a word, and then when it comes to my mouth, it comes out as a different word.
Well,
It's like,
since you shared a poem, I want to share one as
is it
well.
told
And I
by
think
you?
it is not told by. It is now going to be told by me, but it's not by me. But this quote is my absolute favorite. Uh, and I heard this quote first when I was in the MTC, from our mission president, the MTC. So the quote goes like this: "You cannot stay on the summit forever. You have to come down again. So why bother in the first place? Just this: what is above knows what is below, and what is below does not know what is above. One climbs, one sees. One descends, one sees no longer, but one has seen. There is an art of conducting oneself in the lower regions by the memory of what one saw higher up. When one can no longer see, one can at least still know." And so for me, I use this as like a faith thing where, at least in the mission, there were moments of faith, or like even before that,
Mm,
that helps clarify things when I'm in the lowest lows, but also in terms of just logically on how the world is going. And what helps me a lot is in terms of like the summit that it mentions. I think to me, just being in the United States is the summit. Like having lived this long, I'm gratefully well traveled, been like almost everywhere in Europe. I mean, born in the Philippines and now like here in the United States after traveling X, Y, and Z. It's one of those things where I can I can recognize what I have traveled to, and like how my family has got there, and having that level of gratitude helps me bear the things that needs bearing when life gets hard. And as I'm especially sure, like in 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 life, there's things that we can't foresee. But then in the moments when we are in our summits, our highs, we can try to remember those moments and then kind of recognize what it took to get there. And then so when we descend down our summits to go to try to climb another summit, although we can't see that path as clear as before, like
mm.
we were there, it existed.
Right.
As long as we don't like falter. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing that quote.
Yeah, I think it's really we both of us have really we have a lot of reasons to be grateful. For one, we were better off than our parents when they started at our age. Like I've heard stories about my parents when they started off like right out of college and right off
Oh wait,
out of
your
surgical
parents are
mission.
both of your parents, or
Both of
just
my parents, like
hey,
when they started out, like those Bahay Kubos, like we should do an episode of what our parents' life
uh,
was like,
bye,
and then
Kubo.
compare it to like what our house, what our situation is like. Because like the way that I lived out of college and out of mission and living on my own, it is so much better than how a lot of how my parents started off, and I'm always grateful for that. I'm always humbled at it. You and I are very prosperous in a sense. We're not super we don't live a super luxurious lifestyle, but we both have reasons to be grateful, like learning how the ones before us started out. We should do an episode about that. And you know what we should do an episode about too, like since we talked about like these tariffs and like immigration and like these rules, we should do an episode of like if we were the president in the country we currently resided in, what would the laws or the things we'd be doing? We
First of
we
all,
do some
that's not
crazy
possible
stuff.
for me. You need to be born in the United States to be president.
That's the first thing I'd get rid of. Like anyone who can be president, regardless of where you're born, as long as you have a
The thing is,
U.S. passport.
I think it takes a different kind of mindset to be part of the government. It's funny because like there's that difference of the Philippines and the United States where
Right.
uh, the government isn't as prestigious as people might think. Like working in the government.
Really?
So rather, like it's kind of good in comparison to like I think other places like the Philippines, China, like all these other places like Thailand. Like working for the government is actually like something that people want to do, and I think once a country starts doing that, it starts making more power to the government. Like if everybody wants to go to the government now, like now you're part of the power class, and now you can do whatever. Rather in the United States, it's like okay, you do that, but you're gonna forego all this potential monetary value that you could have. And I don't know. I think there's just a good balance to it, where on one hand, working for the government is really safe, but it's not as monetarily gives you like gonna make you successful. On the other hand, working in private is a bit more risky. And so I think there's a good give and take. But in the Philippines, I don't see any negative downsides for working like for the police or like anything civil in that sense.
Income wise, it's slower, and you're definitely always caught in some political beef with
Oh,
whoever's
really?
like running. Yeah, there's right now like they've changed like a lot of the police force in Davao because of some beef with the vice president who was a former mayor in Davao City, and also like the former president was from Davao City. So like there's
Yeah.
always that. And like for me, it's like this is why I'm career in politics. Like even though I feel like there's a lot I can contribute, I'd rather contribute through other means or through business means by providing opportunities in business rather than going into politics and providing opportunities through politics. But that's another thing. Like we should have talked about that, especially tomorrow. Tomorrow is President's Day, so we definitely should
President's
do an
Day.
episode. Like, okay, if we were gonna be the president, like say theoretically, what would we do? And like just bash each other. Like, yeah, that wouldn't work, or yeah, that would definitely work, kind of a stuff.
I don't know. I think yeah, if we are gonna talk about that, expect my ideas to be like the Wild West.
Mine's definitely gonna be wild. It's definitely not gonna make sense to a lot of Filipinos, like the things that I would do. But again,
Well, it
let's
actually
do an episode of
depends.
that and
If
see.
I'm only gonna see the lifetime of what happens like in my lifetime, there's a temptation to just think short term. But obviously, in
Ah,
the
you're
very
one of
long
those
term,
people. You're one of those people though where you bring shame to the next generation.
well, that's a temptation, right? For all the government work, it's like that's the temptation of politics. You want to
Mm,
think short term or say things that are nice now, without really thinking about what it means in an eternal perspective.
right. Yeah, that's something that needs work. Any final comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, Don't elect Chris for president.
Oh gosh, remember when I tried running for like the Filipino club and I lost so bad? Like I only got
Wait,
like
what was the
7.
scorecard? What the heck? Oh
It
man,
was like it was
no, that was not.
97%.
That was. Oh man, that was. I think it was amazing that you even tried, but the way it was, yeah, no, it felt bad. It felt really bad.
Yeah, but like I don't
Borderline
know.
cringe.
That like that I had a lot of learning to do, and definitely I
I
think
don't
I
think
learned
it's
a
you
little
per
more.
se. I think
No,
the
I think
whole
I learned.
thing was a sham. But I have a lot. I have a lot of things to say about that. I think.
We gotta pray the Filipino club doesn't find this, and we're like, what do you mean it's a sham? It's like, okay, this is just purely
Oh,
our opinion.
I mean, what are the facts of the matter? Oh my gosh, it was awful. Oh, just why are they doing an election? We all know what's happening. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries about that. But like
But
for
what's
me,
funny is the I mean, everybody took it so seriously, and then when all the other club presidents heard about it, like all everybody else is like, "Whoa, you guys got it like that? Like it was that serious to become the next club president?" It's like, "Yeah, you guys didn't do that." It's like, "No, we just gonna pass the baton." It's like, what?
yeah, that's it's interesting. We're trying like the democracy, right? But anyway, that's the pod for us. Was a good episode, and yeah, see you guys on the next one.